Hi, it's Professor Lipey, returning for the second of two narrations on cognitive dissonance. Going to begin where I left off last time uh, and talk about effort justification. The idea that when we engage in something that's effortful and our outcomes are not as positive as we hoped they would be, we experience cognitive dissonance. There's an inconsistency between I worked so hard and this is all I got. And, this, you don't have a very positive attitude toward that. So what happens? Well, what happens is we'll change our attitudes to justify the effort, the suffering we put into our behavior. Now, a really good example of this comes from the early and very classic study by Aronson and Mills, okay, in which they looked at what would be the consequences of working hard to get into a group, only to find out that the group was that involved boring kinds of discussions and things like that. So let me describe the study. So what Aronson and Mills did is they had females, college students, basically come to the laboratory with the stated interest being where we know that you're interested in being in psychology discussion groups. That'll help us in studying kind of group behavior and things like that. So we'd we'd like you to become a member of this group, which will meet on occasion and talk about topics in psychology. Now, what the women were also told was, so some of the topics we're going to cover and some of the content is going to be kind of racy and it may be a little bit much for some people, and we'd like you to take this little test to see if we think that you can kind of sort of be in this group. And so in one condition, the low initiation condition. So basically, the idea is that you're going to have to take this kind of initiation, this test to get initiated into this group. And in one condition, the mild initiation condition, basically what the women were asked to do was to read a bunch of words that were mildly suggestive of sex and of sexual kinds of matters. Words like whore, okay, words like cotex, things like that, but pretty mild. And so people were asked to read aloud those words and and how uncomfortable it might make them feel. It wasn't such a big deal. In the severe initiation condition, what the participants were asked to do, what the women were asked to do in order to join the group, is to basically read a lurid passage out of out of a novel, okay, that kind of sort of explicitly described a sexual encounter, okay, and sexual behavior involved, okay, and they were asked to read this aloud to a male experimenter, okay, who was running the study, okay. So in the 1950s, this was not something that happened often, and it would have been extremely embarrassing to the participants. Okay, nonetheless, they went through with it, and the experimenter said, "Okay, well, you should be okay for the group. Would you like to listen in to a group discussion that's already going on?" Okay, and you'll join in at the next group meeting. So they get to listen in to a bunch of co-eds having a discussion, and this was the most boring discussion imaginable about basically the sexual behavior of birds and bees. Okay, so it was very boring, very dry. Okay, not at all, just something you really wouldn't want to be part of the discussion. Okay, and in fact, when they had presented this discussion to women in a control condition who got no initiation, they found that when they then asked them, so how interested are you in continuing with the group? How much do you think you're going to like being in this group? How much did you enjoy what you listened to so far? Okay, and all the responses were pretty negative. It was boring. I really don't want to pursue this, and so on and so forth. But what happened in the initiation conditions? Well, basically, uh, after they listen, okay, after their mild or severe initiation, reading sexually connoted words versus reading a sexually explicit passage to a male experimenter, mild versus severe, then they listen to the boring discussion, group discussion, and then they're asked to rate it. Okay, and the finding was that in the severe initiation group, the participants in the severe initiation group rated the boring discussion significantly more favorable than either the mild or the no initiation control group. Okay, so those who were in the severe initiation went through this kind of very embarrassing kind of test and kind of hazing to get into the group. Okay, when it was very severe, they rate the group as more interesting and something they like to be in, compared to, more so than in the mild initiation. So the dissonance interpretation is that you got two inconsistent cognitions going on here. You've got, I worked hard and I did this really embarrassing thing as a means of getting into this group, okay? And the discussion is really, really boring. It's very, very uninteresting. This isn't a group uh, with tasks that I'd like to be in, okay? Well, you got this dissonance, okay? And in order to reduce the distance, you can't pick your embarrassing kind of behavior, but you can perceive the group and change your attitude toward the group, toward the discussion, as more interesting. Okay, as more interesting. Yes, this was worth making it worthwhile to have gone through this. So you reduce your dissonance by changing your attitude in a positive direction toward what you had been working pretty hard to achieve. So that's effort justification, and we see effort justification, all the time. Okay, I remember when I remember numerous examples. I remember when I went to, I was living in St. Louis, Missouri, and I wanted to go to an Ohio State football game with my daughter and wife, which was at the University of Illinois. 100 miles or so, more than 100 miles away. And the trip to get there turned out to be disastrous. We were late. We had to stop, and my daughter had an activity she had to do before, and it was just a hellish day. Okay. And then we didn't get to the game until almost halftime. It was a boring game. Okay. Ohio State won, but, it was just a very, very boring game. Okay. But objectively it was. But I remember at the time, looking for all the good things that had happened that day and justifying all this effort I had put into something negative, and justifying it by saying, well, yeah, at least I got to see the Buckeyes. I haven't seen them in years. We ultimately ended up at a nice restaurant in Urbana-Champaign. So my whole attitude became more positive because I had worked so hard to get something that really wasn't so cool. Anyways, that's just one of many examples. I'm sure you can think of many times in which you've worked hard for something, put effort into it, not gotten really what you wanted, but you come to see it in a more positive light to justify your effort. Okay. So the more we pay for something, the more we'll come to like it. So paying for something, okay, is a form of effort, right? And so a lot of research has shown that people like products, okay, that they basically overpaid for, okay, more than products that they didn't pay so much for, that involve less monetary effort. Okay, so we often justify our expenses. Okay, we pay a lot for something. There's a lot of dissonance pressure to come to like, to come to feel good about what we got in return. We justify all that we spent on something. Another example of effort justification. Okay, now the third situation we had post-decisional dissonance justifying effort justification. Now we can look at attitude discrepant behavior. So attitude discrepant behavior basically involves, many occasions when through the subtleties of situation, we end up doing something that we really would not, would rather not do. Okay, something that's inconsistent with our attitude, but we do it anyways for one reason or another. Okay. And there's a one of the first and many classics, many studies done on this topic, which basically laid a lot of groundwork for dissonance theory, was the Festinger and Carl Smith 1959 experiment, okay, which is described in your textbook, of course, as well. Okay, so basically, how this went and was participants in this study came to an experiment, okay, that was supposedly involving, responses to various kinds of tasks, okay, having people and performance to various kinds of tasks, okay, and the task that people are asked to do, okay, turns out to be really boring, okay, but what would have made, but some subjects, okay, ended up finding the experiment really kind of interesting. What subjects were those? Those were the subjects who basically were told, okay, were asked to tell another subject that the experiment was enjoyable, okay. I actually am going to show you a video actually on, we'll try to do it on this presentation, and you'll get an idea for it. So it's also going to be in the video theater. But let's go. So basically, what you're going to see is that the participants are offered, the experimenter basically says, after the participants themselves engage in this task, the subjects are offered either $1, okay, or $20 to tell the next subject that the experiment was actually quite interesting. So what happened here? Okay, which subjects really enjoyed the study the most? Okay, well, let's see if we can play this video, and if it doesn't work, it's in the video theater. And then move on from there. It'd be easier to describe it, to talk about it once you've seen this video.
The psychological story of decision-making doesn't end, however, when a decision has been made. The act of making a decision can trigger a flood of other processes. According to psychologist Leon Festinger, whenever we choose to do something that conflicts with our prior beliefs, feelings, or values, a state of cognitive dissonance is created in us, a tension between what we think and what we do. When this tension makes us uncomfortable enough, we're motivated to reduce it in a number of ways. We may change the way we think about the decision, or try to change how others think about it so that they can support our decision. Or we may change some aspect of our behavior so that our decision seems more in character with us. In other words, we try to reduce the dissonance between how we think we should act and how we actually act by changing one or the other. In the mid-50s, Leon Festinger and his colleague Merrill Carlsmith conducted a classic experiment in which students were engaged in very boring tasks. Students were then given a request by one of Festinger's staff.
Okay, that's fine. Let me tell you now what we're actually studying here. It's the effect of preparatory mental set on performance. The rest of the subjects are prepared by being told that the experiment will be very interesting and enjoyable. In fact, lots of fun. Now I have a somewhat unusual request to make of you. The next subject is waiting right outside, but the fellow who ordinarily gives the spiel isn't here. I wonder if you could possibly take his place. As a matter of fact, we figure we'll be needing someone in the future, so I'd like to offer you a $20 retainer and have you remain on call for us. Would that be all right?
$20? That'd be fine. Half the students were randomly assigned to the group that received $20 for lying that the experiment was fun. The other half were given only $1 for lying.
Dollar as a sort of a retainer and have you remain on call with us. Would that be all right with you?
Yes, that'll be all right.
The cognitive dissonance came from the knowledge that the experiment was in fact boring, and $1 was insufficient reward for lying. Many of the $1 subjects actually convinced themselves that the experiment was fun after they made their decision, to reduce the dissonance between their prior beliefs and their behavior. They came to believe a big lie for a small incentive.
To a girlfriend of mine who participated in an experiment last week, and she said it was very tedious. Oh, I don't think that was the same experiment because this one wasn't boring at all. I didn't think so.
The $20 subjects, on the other hand, felt no dissonance because they felt comfortable in lying just for the money.
He said it was pretty miserable and that I should do everything I could to get out of it.
Well, I think maybe your friend was wrong. Perhaps it was a different experiment because this was a lot of fun. It appeared to me as if it were a puzzle. We had to turn these knobs, and I tried to figure out what we were doing it for, but I really couldn't figure it out. Perhaps you'll have better luck.
Other theories might predict that the man who is paid most would have the highest motivation for enthusing over the dull task and would be most sold on it himself. Cognitive dissonance theory leads to an exactly opposite prediction. The man who is paid $20 knows that the task is dull, but he also knows that he had sufficient justification for saying that it wasn't. Did you enjoy working on the manual test?
Well, it really wasn't too enjoyable. In fact, it was rather boring.
How about the man who is paid $1? He knows the task is dull, but he has two discrepant thoughts. He also knows that he did not have sufficient justification for saying that it wasn't. For him, there is dissonance. Time after time, we have seen what follows. He reduces the dissonance by changing his opinion about the dullness of the task. Did you enjoy working on the manual task?
Yes, I enjoyed it.
Would you like to participate in such an experiment again?
Yes, I think I would like to.
Anytime there is insufficient reward, there will be dissonance. The general principle seems to be that people come to believe in and to love the things they have to suffer for.
By discovering how people actually behave and not how some theory says they ought to behave, psychology can provide guidelines to help us catch ourselves before we go astray, or redirect us once we do, if we follow them.
Check out this verbo.
Okay, so that was, I hope you enjoyed the mid-50s clothing, language. Festinger talks about, uses male for, or men for everything, but basically that's how it was. But the point, of course, is the study itself, okay? So these are actual results of the study, okay? So basically people engaged in this really, really boring tasks. then they're asked to basically tell the next subject that it was actually an interesting task, okay, fun task, that they enjoyed doing it, okay. Some people are paid $1, some are paid 20, okay. And so what we find is that you don't see any, and then they're asked, so what's your attitude after they've agreed to tell their lie, okay? And basically we see that if you were paid $20, put on retainer, I'm going to give you $20 if you just go out and do this, okay? There's no change in attitude, okay? People dislike the task, okay, when they're asked what their opinion is. They're paid only $1, okay. They actually when they're asked, what do you think of the task, they actually like it, okay. So this is a kind of a less is more thing. The less compensation they receive for their behavior, okay, their lie, their inconsistent behavior, behavior inconsistent with their attitude, the more likely they were to change their attitude, okay, to bring their attitude in line with this lie they told. The test actually was interesting. So what's going on here? Okay, whoops, went too far. So the punchline is this notion of insufficient justification. Okay, that is, you have your inconsistency. Okay, you have the task was boring, negative attitude. I said it was interesting, positive behavior about the task. Okay? So there's dissonance. In the $20 condition, you've got a third cognition. I was paid $20, okay? And that, in the person's mind, is sufficient justification for basically telling the lie. So that itself reduces the dissonance, okay? Task was boring, I said it was interesting, but I was paid $20, okay? But in the $1 condition, you're only paid $1, okay? That doesn't serve as sufficient justification, okay, for this inconsistency, for this lie, okay? So in order to reduce your dissonance, okay, knowing that you were paid $1 certainly isn't enough, okay? Knowing that, basically you end up changing your attitude, okay, in order to justify the behavior, okay, because the dollar doesn't do it, okay. So the concept of insufficient justification. Okay, now let me tell you a little bit about subsequent research on this topic, including some of my own research I did with one of my doctoral students a long time ago. Basically, the paradigm for studying this attitude discrepant behavior evolved, okay, so that the studies kind of went something like this. People come in, the participants are basically asked to basically endorse a social policy, some sort of position, okay, that they personally disagree with, okay, and instead of money being the inducement, being the kind of third cognition that we're going to look for, it's how much choice people perceive they have, okay, in endorsing a position that they don't agree with, okay. So in the Elkin and Lipke study, okay, which was done at Adelphi University out on Long Island, okay, participants in our study basically are told, come in and they say, well, the university is studying a possible policy or that is going to take an effect involving parking at the university. Okay, so there's a proposal going around that the Bursars Committee on parking fees is studying to have a parking fee, okay, $50 per semester, okay, at Adelphi. Okay, so if you want to park on campus, you're going to have to pay. Okay, before it had been previous, it had been free. Okay, so this is very counter-attitudinal. Okay, before the experiment, people had been basically surveyed about this and other topics, and on a kind of a 31-point scale, the you can see in the attitude before essay, very negative attitudes toward having a parking fee at Adelphi. So the researcher continues, what we'd like to do, what the administration has asked us to do, is to collect student opinions about this. And one of the ways to do this is to have students write a short essay favoring one side or the other. Okay, you can either write an essay that's going to be in favor of a parking fee, or an essay that basically opposes it. Okay, then we're going to take your essays, and they're going to go on to the we'll send them on to the bursar's office. Okay, so half of the participants are told, so we've already got enough anti-parking fee essays. What we'd like from you is a pro-parking fee essay, so we've assigned you to that task. Okay, so please take the next 5 minutes. Here's paper and pencil to write an essay that favors a parking fee. Very counterattitudinal, right? Okay. In the high choice condition, the instructions change a little bit. The experimenter says, you know, we've already got enough pro-parking fee anti-parking fee essays, so what we really need are anti-parking fee, our pro-parking fee essays, okay, essays that favor a parking fee, okay. Now, it's completely up to you, but it would really help me if you could write an essay that favors a parking fee, okay. But it's up to you, okay. I'm not even going to know what you chose, and people take the bait in this high choice condition, and most people just go along with the experimenter, do the experimenter a favor, if you will, and write a pro-parking fee essay. Okay, so in both conditions, low and high choice, people have been made to are writing an essay that contradicts their attitude. They're writing an essay that's in favor of a parking fee. Okay. But in one case, okay, they've been told to do it. They don't have any choice. The experimenter assigned them to that task. In the other case, they're basically given an illusion that they're free to choose either way they want. Okay, it's up to you. Okay, but it really helped me if you do this. So everybody writes a pro-parking fee essay. Okay, and then afterward, people are asked, so what are your attitude? What do you think about this policy? Okay, what do you think about a parking fee? So to what extent are you in favor of it? And as you can see, when people basically were told and assigned the task of writing the essay that contradicted their attitude, they, basically no change at all, okay, in attitude toward the parking fee, okay. In the high choice condition, however, okay, when people basically freely chose, okay, to write a pro-parking fee essay, okay, really chose to engage in attitude discrepant behavior, because their attitude was against the parking fee, you can see they show a dramatic amount of change in attitude. They move in favor, okay, they become more favorable toward a parking fee. Okay, they become more favorable, okay, as a means of reducing their dissonance, okay, of having a negative attitude, but engaging in behavior that's positive toward the policy, okay. How do you reconcile it? You move your attitude in a positive direction, okay, toward your behavior. Why didn't the low choice people do it? Because they had sufficient justification, right? They were told to do this, okay. They didn't freely choose to do it, okay. So that's a good example of the less is more. The less choice people have in what they're doing, okay. Let me rephrase that, okay. The more choice people perceive that they have, okay, the more likely they are to change their attitude, okay. So in terms of the less is more, the greater the inducement, you're being forced to do it, it's not your choice, the less the less likely to change. The less the inducement, it's your choice, okay, the more likely you are to change, okay. Now, the alkaline LIPE studies also measured people's physiological arousal, okay. They basically um, the whole procedure was in the midst of a longer procedure in which people had been hooked up to a measure of their physiological arousal known as the galvanic skin response, okay, which measures essentially the amount of sweat not discernible in one's palm or in one's fingertips, okay? And when you get a decrease in GSR, that's indicative of increased arousal, okay? Now, Festinger had argued that that dissonance is physiologically arousing, okay? That when we experience this inconsistency under the right conditions, it creates not only a psychological tension, but a kind of a physiological unrest, okay? So we were measuring this as people engaged in these various tasks, including writing the essay, okay? And what we found was that in the low choice condition, after people write their counterattitudinal essay, they basically engaged in this attitude discrepant behavior, writing this essay that goes against their attitude, nothing really happens. But if they did it under high choice, and this is such a fascinating finding, the only difference is the perception of choice. If they transgressed their attitude, wrote the essay in favor of the parking fee under high choice, they showed this spike in physiological arousal, suggesting that there's some discomfort associated with dissonance, even at a basic physiological level. So dissonance is physiologically arousing. And since then, several other studies have basically confirmed this finding. Okay, so let's summarize dissonance a little bit here. So basically, the whole idea is that that we engage in a behavior that's inconsistent with our attitude. Okay. And there are some antecedent conditions that produce discomfort. That one of which we've seen, which is the choice. What does choice do? Okay. Well, it provides. It doesn't give sufficient justification, because it's insufficient to justify what you did. And it also, if you chose it, you basically accepted personal responsibility. That's an essential ingredient of dissonance. The other thing that I haven't mentioned, which helps produce the dissonance but isn't absolutely necessary, is when that behavior is going to have an unwanted negative consequence. Okay, so in our studies, okay, people are told your essay is going to the Bursars committee, okay, which is going to kind of decide this issue. Okay, so what you did, okay, arguing in favor of a parking fee, okay, could have the consequence of actually influencing the having an influence on the committee that could actually affect, your life and others' life by imposing a parking fee. Okay, so especially when there's unwanted negative consequences, and essentially when you take personal responsibility, okay, the high choice, put that all together, okay, and that's going to create this physiological arousal. And if you basically don't have another reason to be aroused that you can see, okay, the ingredients basically are set up so that we will experiencing attitude change. Okay, so behavior that's inconsistent with one's attitude, these conditions are met, these responses occur, and ultimately we're going to see attitude change as a way of reducing the dissonance of, I believe this, no on this issue, yes on my behavior. I've got to change my attitude to make it consistent with my attitude if the conditions are met. And that's dissonance. All right. So self-integrity threat magnifies dissonance, but may not be absolutely necessary. What do I mean by this? Okay. So contemporary dissonance theories tend to emphasize the role of the self. Remember the self? Dissonance is magnified when the self-concept is threatened. So when we do something that's going to have a bad effect and that we feel personally responsible for, we freely chose to do it, okay? That basically kind of, your self-esteem, your self-concept is going to basically take a little bit of a hit, and that's going to increase the dissonance. Okay, so when those kinds of factors are emergent, okay, we see dissonance effects very strongly, strong magnification of dissonance effects. So dissonance is more strongly aroused when people transgress their self-image, doing something that they feel calls their self-integrity into question. You can see that in the original Festinger and Carl Smith. You basically, for a buck, you basically lied to a comrade, okay, to another student. Dissonance can also be reduced, okay, this ties in with the self, through what's called self-affirmation, okay. So the textbook talks about this a little bit. Well, and Claude Steele, who we saw with stereotype threat research, has this theory that, well, dissonance very broadly involves the self, okay? That when we experience dissonance, we're really basically, our self is threatened, okay? We've done something that transgresses our self-image, okay? And so whatever we can do to kind of affirm the self-image, okay, may serve to help reduce dissonance. So Steele has found that, and others have found that, you know, if you basically put people through, for example, a study like the Elkin and Lipey, okay, but before they're asked to give their attitude after they've written the counter-attitudinal essay, we put people through a questionnaire task in which they're asked to talk about what they like about themselves, okay? Something that's they can self-affirm themselves, okay? When you do that, that reduces the likelihood that they're going to change their attitude, because they've managed to reduce at least the problems associated with dissonance in a broader context in terms of inconsistencies by showing themselves, you know, their good aspects, by affirming themselves. Okay, if you affirm yourselves, you feel less dissonance. Okay, by your inconsistent behavior. Okay. Aversive consequences aren't even necessary, okay, if you've got this internalized sense of self-integrity that's threatened, okay? So even if there are no aversive consequences of writing this essay, okay, I know, okay, you know, it basically violated my own sense, okay? The dissonance is threatening in that way, okay? So even without aversive consequences, you may get the dissonance effect, okay? So, but mere inconsistency with minimal connection to the self may arouse some discomfort and create dissonance, okay? It automatically doesn't feel right when we engage in inconsistent behavior, okay? You know, there's something in us that basically it just doesn't feel right, okay? And we're kind of wired to detect that something is off and not right, okay? And that kind of sort of is what's capable of propelling the dissonance reduction that we've been seeing in this narration and that you're reading about. Okay, so how do we reduce dissonance? Well, there's lots of ways to do it, okay? So must dissonance be reduced, or will it be forgotten? You know, if I just let this go, okay, you know, will I eventually get over my dissonance, okay? Well, okay, Possibly. That's a form of distraction, right? Okay. But what's important is the importance of the dissonant cognitions. So we can range from just forgetting about your dissonance and somehow letting it go to categorical attitude change, where you actually change your attitude if the opportunity comes, which happens in the studies we've seen. Okay, you have the opportunity to change your attitude right then and there. Okay, about the task. Okay, about the parking fee and so on. Okay, but with a really important set of cognitions, okay, it might be really difficult to um, just simply change the attitude and be done with it. Okay, we may restructure our attitude system. Okay, um, so and we're going to give an example of that in just a second as we close this, as we move toward the conclusion of this narration. And the idea of forgetting, okay, is very important. Um, in the sense that one time, one of the things that might help with dissonance, which is a troubling kind of thing, is to basically escape the dissonance. Okay, just like we can escape the self. Okay, as we saw very early in the course, we can escape dissonance with alcohol, with drugs, with distractions, somehow getting your mind off it. And just like when it comes to threats to the self and self-esteem, dissonance has been linked with alcohol use, with drugs, with distraction, with lots of things that allow you to escape it. Okay, in fact, research has been done, and I've done some of this, where if people are given the opportunity to consume to consume what they think is alcohol after they've been induced to engage in a manner inconsistent with their attitudes, okay, that sometimes they don't even show the classic dissonance reduction effect, okay. Uh, they don't change their attitudes because they've basically engaged in kind of a behavior which they associate with forgetting your troubles, as it were, okay. So the idea of dissonance is much broader, okay, and much more significant when we take a wider look at it. So, final thing to talk about is to talk about a study that I did a number of years ago, which basically showed that dissonance can, in fact, when we experience dissonance, the changes that it induces, okay, may go beyond just a specific attitude in mind. So Lippi and Eisenstadt, 1994, it was a precursor to the Eisenstadt et al. Assigned reading, okay, which showed, as you'll read, the mediation of dissonance arousing thoughts, okay. So let's look at this original study, okay. So white college students, okay, are asked, high choice, or told, low choice, to write an essay endorsing the following university proposal. Okay, I'll read this with you. The total amount of scholarship money the university has, the percentage given to deserving black students should be at least doubled. The essay would then be sent to a decision-making university committee studying the proposal. So people are asked to write an essay endorsing this counter-attitudinal position, okay, that the university was about to move toward, okay. It's counterattitudinal because these are white college students and there's a pie of scholarship money, and you're endorsing that the percentage of that pie that's given to black students should be doubled. That means less for you, okay. So they're told that the essay is going to be sent to a decision-making university committee studying the proposal. Okay? Now, most students complied with the instructions, even though the proposal was counterattitudinal, because it would be costly to deserving white students. Okay? So it's a pro-social act, okay, to write this essay, but it's basically counterattitudinal. people aren't really in favor of it. After completing and turning in the essay, participants were asked how much they personally agreed with the proposal. Okay. Then later, in the guise of another study, they completed the pro and anti-blacks belief scale, which measures broader beliefs about African Americans. Okay. So the pro-black scale measures sympathetic, positive beliefs about blacks. Okay. So especially those involving unfairness. Examples of pro-black items are: this country would be better off if it were more willing to assimilate the good things in black culture. Too many blacks still lose out on jobs and promotion because of their skin color. Okay, so those are agreeing with that. Basically, those are the pro-black items. The anti-black items are black children would do better in school if their parents had better attitudes about learning. Blacks don't seem to use opportunities to own and operate little shops and business. So if you agree with those are kind of anti-black statements. And so what we can get is we can get a sense of how positively white people feel in terms of their beliefs about blacks. Okay, would these things change? Okay, after this dissonance experience? Well, here are the results. Okay. So basically, so they've written the essay, okay, and I forgot to add that in half of the cases, people were given, that spiel, it's up to you. We really need pro essays in favor of this proposal to help blacks. Okay, but it's completely up to you. Okay, but we really would help us if you'd write a pro essay. Okay, or they were told, they were assigned to it. Okay, and so we measure the attitudes. Okay, and if you look at the attitude change, okay, down here, okay, sorry, up here, okay. In the high choice condition, don't worry too much about this privacy dimension, but if we just look at publicity, so if we look at the, because when it was highly public, people changed their attitude no matter what, okay? But when it was private, okay, you can see you don't get any attitude change under low choice. They don't become more favorable toward the scholarship idea, doubling the scholarships for blacks. But under high choice, they do. Okay? So that's the classic dissonance effect. And you also find that in the high publicity condition where their behavior was very, very public. It was. Now let's look at the pro-black beliefs is where we found the effects. Okay? So under low choice, okay, you can see, and publicity is low, okay, that is, it's very private, okay, you don't get any change in pro-black beliefs, okay, if the choice around the essay was low. If choice is high, okay, you get a change in pro-black beliefs, okay, you get people becoming more favorable on those dimensions that are good things about black culture and so on and so forth. People became more favorable. Okay, in the sense we reduced their prejudice. Okay, by the way, if it was highly public, okay, when people endorse this even under low choice, but in a very public way, we got the change, the reduction in prejudice. But for dissonance, the essential thing is the difference between low and high choice. Okay, so the whole idea here was that the change here that we found that people were forced to engage in by the dissonance they were experiencing, okay, changing their attitude toward the policy, generalized. Okay, they kind of restructured. Okay. If you write this essay, it's going to jumble up a lot of things about your stereotypes, about your beliefs about African Americans, if you're a white participant, as they were. And so the changes that were promoted, okay, by writing the essay, okay, changing the attitude, generalizes to more broader changes, okay, So we called it the generalization of dissonance reduction. And we thought about this in terms of, trying to reduce prejudice by going through the side door. Okay, you have them focus on a particular issue. People are asked to basically endorse an issue that they wouldn't ordinarily endorse. That generates the ingredients for changing their attitude, but also gets them thinking more about this. Okay, about this issue and about, in this case, the African American experience. Okay, now the assigned reading basically takes this further. Okay, and looks at, so how did the generalization work out? Okay, and we found that it really was the thoughts that people had to come up with as they were writing their essay. Okay, that kind of drive them to broader changes. Okay, so dissonance in this subtle way is driving cognitive kinds of processes that encourage change. Okay, well, that is it for today. Okay, and we will move on to another topic in the next duration, which is going to be things like conformity and compliance, but that's for another day. So sign off for now.